A great boss fight isn't just entertaining. If done right, it can be the highlight of a game and a cherished memory. Of course, there's the other side of the coin though. Sometimes a boss fight can be so underwhelming they can ruin the entire experience, even if the rest of the game is great. Whatever the reason, these inadequate bosses were the only flaw in their otherwise perfect games. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 boss fights that stopped video games being perfect. Number 10. Aurora Unit 313, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Not only do the games have a vast array of creative bosses, each title concludes with an epic brawl. Fighting Samus Aran's evil twin, Dark Samus, in the climax of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was a huge moment for any fan of the series. So when it was announced Metroid Prime 3 Corruption would conclude the trilogy, at least for the time being, fans expected the showdown to be one for the ages. Instead, the last encounter is against a robot tentacle thingy. The enemy is so forgettable most Metroid fans can't remember its name, appearance, origin, or fighting pattern. What's more frustrating is this problem could have been easily fixed. Instead of battling whatever the hell this is, the final boss could have been Ridley, who Samus fought earlier in the game. Considering the cybernetic pterosaur killed Samus's parents, it would have made more sense for Ridley to serve as the Corruption's final antagonist rather than some random machine. Number 9. Neo Cortex, Crash Bandicoot 2. Like most follow-ups, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back enhanced everything which made its predecessor special. More challenging levels, more hilarious bosses, more frickin' crystals to collect. Even though everything seemed to be going swimmingly in Crash 2, the whole thing falls apart at the end. In the last level, our Aussie hero dons a jetpack to chase Neo Cortex through a tunnel in outer space. After thwacking the mad scientist 3 times, the game suddenly draws to a close. This confrontation is so suspiciously brief, it feels like the developers ran out of time and cobbled this section together to secure a mandated deadline. The little scrimmage between Crash and Cortex is so disappointing you half expected Naughty Dog to replace it with a more impressive showdown in the remake. Sadly, the reboot's finale is just as mediocre as the original. Number 8. Ursula, Kingdom Hearts 2. Throughout Kingdom Hearts, Sora and his companions will have their adventure hindered by many iconic Disney villains, including Cerberus, the Queen of Hearts, and Jafar. And in the Little Mermaid section, it's no surprise when you're challenged by Ariel's nemesis Ursula. By harnessing the power of Triton's trident, the wicked antagonist grows to gargantuan size and summons lightning and combustible bubbles to defeat Sora. As a concept, there should be nothing wrong with this altercation with Ursula. The grinning witch's strategies are tough but fair, giving the player the right amount of challenge. However, this encounter is reviled amongst players since Ursula soaks up damage like some sort of obese sponge. Considering you face the Sorceress of the Sea reasonably early in the game, there's no reason why she has so much health. What's worse is that there's no real technique to beat her. All you have to do is wail on her for ages, which quickly becomes repetitive, especially since the swimming controls aren't great. For such an iconic Disney villain, it's a pity the developers made the fight with Ursula so tedious. Number 7. RODRIGO Borgia, Assassin's Creed 2. One reason why Assassin's Creed 2's legacy has endured is because of how personal the story feels. The villain, Pope Rodrigo Borgia, isn't just the leader of the Italian sect of the Templar. He oversaw the execution of Ezio's family, which drove our hero to follow the Assassin Brotherhood. Exterminating Rodrigo is no easy task, since the malevolent maestro is armed with the Staff of Eden, an artifact that endows the wielder with the power of invisibility, super strength, telekinesis, and telepathy. Because of this godlike artifact, the player assumes the final battle will be an epic showdown involving Rodrigo harnessing his supernatural might. Instead, the Templar leader decides to fight the man who was sent to kill him with his fists. Now, there's no question Rodrigo Borgia was a force to be reckoned with during the Renaissance, but when it comes to a fist fight, a master assassin like Ezio won't have any difficulty beating a chubby middle-aged man. Just to make this fight more anticlimactic, Ezio lets the man who murdered his family live. Because the story concludes with Ezio failing to avenge his family, you can't help being dissatisfied when you watch Rodrigo live to see another day. Number 6. Shao Kahn, Mortal Kombat 9. Now, it's no secret Mortal Kombat has its fair share of unfair bosses. Kintaro's teleport stomp is unblockable, Motaro is immune to projectiles, but Kahn in MK9 is a terrible boss for 2 reasons. Firstly, the the Skull Mask combatant can stun lock you while you're performing almost any move, leaving you open to his vicious attacks. This technique is so annoying most players don't bother fighting Khan in a straight battle. Instead, they spam the Outworld Emperor from afar with projectiles. And that's the other problem. If you keep your distance while shooting fireballs, you can beat the final boss without breaking a sweat. This method is so easy to implement, some players have won the game having never fought Shao Kahn fairly. Number 5. Bowser, Super Mario Galaxy 2. In the final level, the titular plumber must face off against Bowser. I know, totally original concept. During this scrap, the King of Koopas will assault Mario with a flurry of punches, meteorites, and shockwaves, while Nintendo's mustachioed mascot is standing on a small planetoid. Sure enough, when the duel seemingly concludes, Mario's arch-nemesis will grow massively in size, kicking off the true final battle, which has Bowser chasing Mario through space. But all you have to do is ground pound 4 meteorites into the overgrown turtle to finish him off. Because you have access to an unlimited amount of coins, you can regenerate your health whenever you want, taking out any possible challenge. Even though Bowser is terrifyingly big and the choral music sounds epic, the whole bout will be over in about 30 seconds. Number 4. Nemesis, Resident Evil 3 Remake. Even though Resident Evil made a name for itself for popularizing horror in gaming, the third outing dialed the fear factor up to 11 with the introduction of Nemesis. Due to his ferocious speed, devastating attacks, and apparent immortality, you can't help feeling dread when you hear this monster trudging towards you. But another element which helped Nemesis stand out is how the player is often given a choice with how to take him on. Will you jump off a bridge to evade the colossal zombie, or shove him off? Will you stand and fight or seek shelter in a nearby building? This was a neat idea since it encouraged multiple playthroughs, so players could experience every aspect of the game. Sadly, this element took a step backwards in Resi 3 Remake. Even though Nemesis had never looked more badass, every encounter with the zombie powerhouse is just a straightforward battle. Because fans already got the same experience with fighting Mr. X in Resi 2 Remake, you'd assume the developers would have given the Nemesis fights more variety. Instead, all we got was a Mr. X reskin. Number 3. NECRON, Final Fantasy IX. The feather-haired sorceress Kuja serves as the antagonist of Final Fantasy IX. The insidious genome hopes to seize control of a great power to use it to rule all of Gaia. But after defeating Kuja, our hero Zidane learns there's another villain called NECRON who's been behind everything this whole time. It's so out of left field, the player didn't know NECRON's name or what he looked like until 5 seconds before he attacks you. Weirdly, this change-up would have been fine if the developers stuck with the original plan. Until the last minute, the final boss was meant to be Hades, who was eventually reassigned as a secret superboss. Since Hades is mentioned in the opening, his reveal as the big bad wouldn't have come across as arbitrary. You could forgive Final Fantasy IX a little if NECRON was an interesting foe, but considering his motivation is to destroy all of existence, there's nothing appealing about him, save for his cool design. Number 2. Every boss apart from GOHT, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. In every other Legend of Zelda entry, entering the last dungeon room is an invigorating moment, since the player knows they'll need to pull out all the stops to stand a chance against the final boss. But not only are the antagonists in Majora's Mask surprisingly easy, you can defeat most of them by hacking and slashing, including the titular villain. Even though Ocarina of Time had some pretty easy foes like Goma and Dodongo, you still need to strategize to beat them. But here you can emerge victorious by just flailing your sword around. What's more bizarre is that sub-bosses like Wart and Wizrobe require far more strategy and precision. This issue was so apparent, all the bosses were revised when Majora's Mask was ported to the 3DS. Number 1. Frank Fontaine, BioShock. BioShock abandoned certain gaming tropes like boss battles so it could focus more on character development and narrative-driven gameplay. This decision was sensible since squaring off against screen-filling assailants would have dampened the slow, eerie atmosphere and philosophical undertones of this masterful shooter. But because 2K Games' title would have been pretty anticlimactic if it didn't end with something resembling a final boss, BioShock concludes with our hero going head-to-head against Frank Fontaine. While dodging your foe's generic attacks, the scuffle seemingly concludes after the player injects Fontaine with an antidote 4 times. Because of how abrupt this encounter is, most players assume this is merely the first phase and the true fight is about to begin. But no. that's it. BioShock's final showdown is over in a minute. By comparison, the big daddies in the earlier stages gave the player far more trouble. If you saw this utterly underwhelming tussle out of context, you'd assume you were watching a generic shooter rather than one of the greatest narratively driven games ever. This confrontation has become so infamous the game's creator Ken Levine has apologized for ending BioShock with a quote, naked Atlas boss battle. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other boss fights that stopped video games from being perfect. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness.